Hi, I'm Joe, and welcome to Anxiety Addicts Bedtime Stories. This story is awful in the best way possible, and if you listen to the end, I will tell you a little secret about it that will hurt no one but me. It wasn't the croissants. Part of it was the croissants. It was also the pizza and the heavy dressing on absolutely everything. Eggs? Here's some hollandaise. Asparagus? Here's some hollandaise. Bread, steak, vegetables. Why, here is a stick of butter that we call hollandaise. It was also not having a gym to sweat it out or a place to hike and using the country's culinary fame as a way to help band-aid the fact that she was quite lonely. It might have been an unpopular opinion and one that Brooke chose not to ever share, but the truth was, she didn't like Paris. Her university offered a semester abroad that didn't cost any more than regular tuition to stay in New York. She saw the flyer on the library door, spent a day applying instead of studying statistics, and it seemed like a no-brainer decision when she got accepted. She would learn French and broaden her horizons and get away from the neck-tattooed gentleman whom she had become fond of spending time with and knew it was a bad idea. So, Paris, here came Brooke, and it's not like it was all bad. At this point in her life, she lived on her own in two different cities, San Francisco and New York. She had some experience in getting to know a place. She would put her headphones in and just walk for hours. She kept a map in her backpack, and even though, truth be told, she was freaking horrible at reading maps, and they might have done more harm than good in helping her navigate, but she would always find a hole-in-the-wall place to get coffee and would search for funky vintage shops or a dive bar in which to have a beer and read a book or talk to random strangers. But this method to getting to know a place wasn't exactly how it worked in Paris. First of all, 25 years ago, you couldn't get a coffee to go. That sounds weird and untrue, but it was. You had to sit down at a cafe and order an espresso, and if you were already sitting there, it felt strange not to get a pastry, especially since your coffee was served in a toddler-sized mug and gone in 30 seconds. Now, she'd always liked wandering through city streets with a paper cup in hand. This option was not on the menu in this oh-so-fancy European city. Brooke arrived in Paris a couple of weeks before the semester began, stayed in a hostel, and was committed to familiarizing herself with the neighborhoods before, she assumed, she would get inundated with homework, nightlife, and attractive guys wearing berets named Pierre. So she sat at the cafes, ordered the pastries, stared at strangers, gained some weight, and managed to noticeably slow down her metabolism. For whatever reason, Paris made it hard for her to poop. On the first day of orientation, Brooke arrived in what she thought were her cool and fashionable city clothes. She pulled on her black pointy-toe boots, a pair of utterly shredded jeans, a Van Halen t-shirt, and a leather jacket. It was her East Village of New York uniform. In Paris, she was realizing, it made people think she'd crawled out of the bottom of a dumpster. The women in the city were different. They stalked the cobblestone streets in cream-colored stiletto pumps and perfectly pressed pants. And they were all so skinny that they looked like they would fall over onto their tiny bums if they encountered a strong breeze. She'd read the book French Women Don't Get Fat and found herself confused at how quickly her clothes seemed to shrink on her frame. Also, she didn't read the book. She read the title. Then she traveled to France and assumed that by the power of some literary osmosis, the cover of that book would somehow be absorbed by her body and all would be well. Remember, this was in the 90s. There was no body positivity movement. There was Ally McBeal. And Brooke was just as much of a product of that culture as anyone she knew. Looking down the sidewalk of the Champs-Élysées, it seemed like France's local television networks were broadcasting similar content. Everyone was tiny, and it bugged Brooke. She hated feeling so out of place in this foreign land. But she put on her happy face the first day of this new school. She dressed in her favorite clothes, caffeinated herself at the local bar, which is apparently what they called coffee shops, and arrived with a good attitude. And she got lucky. She immediately made some friends. And she tried to make more. However, the French did not feel a need for Brooke in their lives. She would go to the clubs and the lounges in elastic-waisted bottoms, ready to party. She'd order shots of tequila and then spend 10 minutes explaining to the bartender what she meant. She thought her French skills were much more refined than they were, especially after she'd had a few. But this wasn't how the French 20-somethings partied. They ordered 1 glass of champagne and sipped it all night, and then did not look desperately for 2 a.m. pizza. Maybe if she'd read the book, this was why French women didn't get fat. Lack of trying or willingness was not the issue to making Brooke fall in love with Paris or to make Paris fall in love with Brooke. They were just incompatible. This happens. But she didn't know that then. In New York, she'd had no problem meeting guys. There were guys with thick glasses and degrees, guys with neck tattoos and questionable pasts, and scruffy post-grads who showed up on dates on a skateboard. It was fun. It was exciting. And dating was an effortless scene that she didn't really have to worry about. This new world was, well, a new world. Guys didn't talk to her or look at her when she went out. And on the rare occasion that they did, it felt creepy, not fun. She'd been in Paris since August, and it was the end of November, and she had spent every late night alone. It wasn't the most devastating thing that had ever happened to Brooke, but it wasn't exactly what she was looking for her Parisian experience. So when Thanksgiving rolled around and she hadn't bothered to make plans to leave Paris as all of her new friends had intelligently done, she found herself alone in this dysfunctional relationship with the city. That weekend, she had no friends, no family, no plans. Miss Uber extroverted Brooke didn't like this feeling. So she made a decision, out of necessity. She would go to the school-sponsored Thanksgiving dinner and sit next to the cute California surfer boy and just see where the night went. She had officially given up on French guys. I mean, they'd given up on her first, but who is counting? Waking up on Thanksgiving morning as if a Hollywood set director had been given the task of creating the dreariest and most melancholy day for a Wes Anderson movie, the sky hovered close to the buildings in an almost comical gray. The rain splashed against the old windows in the small room she rented from a well-to-do family, and getting out of bed was the most aerobic thing that she had done in months. Having nothing to do and no energy with which to do it, she decided to put together an outfit for the evening. There wasn't much to choose from. Most of the pieces by now didn't fit, and in the few months she'd been living in Paris seemed outdated and uncool. Despite this, Brooke felt fortunate. She had the most perfect pair of pants. She'd purchased them uptown at a consignment shop in New York, and they were the only designer label in her closet. They'd never been tight on her, were thick, cream-colored denim, and had a sort of metal stud-type decoration dripping down the side of each leg. At least she knew she could wear those. Wait, no. She tried. She pulled up one leg and then the other, but these uncompromising trousers had no intention of finding their way over her butt. Shit, this was not the plan. Okay, she thought to herself, you're not a quitter. Was this the most appropriate situation for this specific pep talk? No, this should have been reserved for a softball field or an important test. But Brooke wasn't in the greatest headspace of her life, so she pulled and coaxed and struggled and maneuvered the fabric onto her body. Then she went into the small bathroom at the end of the hallway and took a shower with the pants on. Yeah, you heard that right. A shower with her pants on. She planned to stretch them out while they were wet and then let them dry on her legs. She felt smarter than she did 5 minutes earlier. But now, with soaking wet pants, leaving the apartment was out of the question. So was leaving her room. She already had a strained relationship with her host family, who seemed to think she wasn't the proper young lady they'd requested. She certainly wasn't going to walk into the kitchen in soaking wet jeans. But she was hungry, which left her with no other options than tap water and a bag of Halloween candy that her mother had sent her in a care package. And these are all the reasons that Brooke, uncomfortably bloated, annoyingly constipated, in drenched pants, and a sad mood, ended up eating 2 Reese's Cups and a king-size Snickers. If you thought this would help her stomach situation, you'd be wrong. But our leading lady got lucky. The pants dried by evening and were buttonable by 7 p.m. And then she got unlucky. Cute surfer boy was nowhere to be seen at the dark and kind of cold restaurant with the other university stragglers. She tried to nonchalantly ask every single person if they knew where he was. The story she heard about him was a last-minute Ryanair ticket to Amsterdam. Oh, how she wished she was in Amsterdam. Or really anywhere else with alcohol and weed and sweatpants and cute boys. She would have regretted her decision to attend this sad and dark dinner, but her other option was rewatching the one Sex and the City DVD that someone had lent her and then eating more processed American chocolate. So she helped herself to the table wine and tried to make conversation with the other students. This Thanksgiving had not attracted the party crowd. And as Brooke tried harder and harder to make best friends for life in the wooden chairs and the way too much soft cheese, she drank more and more. This was another stroke of bad luck. Because of the wine, she didn't feel particularly embarrassed with what happened next. The bad luck was the top button of the pants finally feeling totally overwhelmed by its insurmountable job and popping off with impressive force hit the drama teacher in the kneecap. Though Brooke was quite loose, there was still a pulse of common sense running through her body, even when her pants were threatening to cut off her circulation. She knew that her button exploding off was a sign to leave. So with hugs and tearful goodbyes, really only on her part, Brooke decided to walk across the city to get to her apartment. She knew she needed fresh air, that a walk wouldn't hurt her, and that the contents of her stomach needed the unself-conscious freedom to fart as much as she pleased. And the walk was a good idea. She strolled through one arrondissement after another. It wasn't Thanksgiving in France, just a normal rainy night in November, where most people were home or rushing in or out of the grocery store. Brooke didn't mind the rain, probably because of the wine. She walked and farted and listened to her stomach grumble. Maybe all that soft cheese was a mistake. She was 3 blocks away from her apartment when she saw an attractive 20-something-year-old man. He wore a green army supply coat, a ball cap, and just the cutest amount of stubble. This story is not going where you think it's going. And he was smoking a cigarette. With all of Brooke's partying, she was never really a smoker. It wasn't a health decision, a dental hygiene decision, or a financial decision. She just didn't love cigarettes. Until that moment. The thought of smoking one, of settling her stomach, of making her finally be able to go to the bathroom was attractive enough to make her talk to the random stranger. In what she thought was impeccable French, she asked if she could have a cigarette. He replied with a bunch of words that she didn't understand. But Brooke was buzzed and hadn't talked to a Frenchman since she'd given up on them, so she nodded her head vigorously with her best smile. The guy shrugged and passed her a cigarette. This isn't the last moment Brooke remembers, but it was close. Also, the story isn't going where you think it's going. Brooke somehow managed to walk those last 2.5 blocks to the fancy neighborhood and the ultra-fancy apartment where she rented her very unfancy room. She did not take the elevator up to the 6th floor. The elevator was the size of a coffin, and there was no scenario on the planet where her mind was going to willingly lock her body in that kind of a space. The stairs were the obvious option, except that from Brooke's point of view, they were moving and floating and bobbing like seagulls on a wave. She looked up. The walls pulsated. The light sconces above her seemed to grow lips and whisper her name as the bulbs flickered. She tried to catch her breath and slow her pulse, sitting on the cold floor of the building's entrance. She hadn't realized that she hadn't smoked any pot since she'd gotten to this uptight city. She had thought it wasn't a thing. Maybe her body just wasn't used to it. Or maybe this was this hash stuff that she'd only heard about. Whatever it was, whatever she'd inhaled, was now rushing through her body and convincing her that she had fallen into Alice's Wonderland and that she might die there. But Brooke didn't die. She counted her breaths, each one an affirmation that she was still alive. She curled her body up under the decorative table in the lobby and got very lucky. None of the snooty apartment residents came home late that night. When she finally woke up, however many hours later, she felt an incredible sense of relief. She felt lighter somehow, so much lighter, and her stomach felt fine for the first time in recent memory. The ease her body felt was refreshing and somewhat surprising. After a marijuana-induced panic attack, were you really supposed to feel this great? And that's when she pulled herself off the old tiled floor, cracked her neck back into place, and realized that she had pooped her pants. So at 4 a.m., she crawled up all 6 flights of stairs, snuck into the well-appointed apartment, darted in her much-neglected bedroom, locked the door, and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She peeled off the pants and took the longest shower of her adult life, replaying the walk home in her mind. She remembered the conversation that she had pretended to understand with the charming Frenchman. She almost hit her palm to her forehead. Oh, he was warning her about the cigarette. Now, Brooke might have been a bit of a wild card. She might have been a party girl with an attitude. She may have also been overconfident in her language skills. But she was not dumb. She knew how lucky she was to be safe and alive and now having a functioning digestive system. So, she got out of the steaming hot shower, wrapped herself in a towel, and put the pants where they belonged, in the trash. Okay, the story's about me. And it might have been CRACK. I don't think it was weed. Ah! Oh, I hope my children never see this. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to Anxiety Addicts Bedtime Stories. We're here to help you take your mind off whatever is making you spiral by listening to a story about someone else's hilarious or mortifying experience. And we know you have your own. Please DM or email your stories of bad decisions, miscommunications, and Murphy's Law. Your support helps us keep doing what we love. And don't forget to like, rate, and subscribe. And as always, sweet dreams. This episode was written and recorded by Joe Newman with editing and sound design by Morgan Walsh.